I really had no intention of looking at this because I didn't think I'd have to. Like so many others, I figured it was just another big-budget shooter, and I couldn't figure out why so many people were asking about it or why Dresker even suggested it to me. So after snatching up a beta code from a Humble Bundle and giving it a shot during a closed beta, I found out why so many people were asking me about it. It was an MMO. Kinda. The fact that it is an MMO makes a lot of that kinda make more sense as to why people seem so confused about this title. But it counts, so here we go. This is the MMO Grinder, and it's time to look at Tom Clancy's The Division. Forgive me if I omit the Tom Clancy's from the title of The Division from this point on. There's plenty of legit reasons for me to do so, and syllable sacrifice isn't the most pressing. The Division is a realistic, modern-day, semi-open-world MMO light shooter from everyone's favorite company, Ubisoft. I say these odd prefixes because not a single thing about that sentence really defines what The Division is. It's single-player, but has instances that you can bring friends in. It's open-world PvP, gated off by level blocks and locked behind a very distinct opt-in wall. It's modern day, but features that almost plausible but still teetering into the realm of highly improbable sci-fi style gadgetry. It's realistic in tone and setting, but features mechanics that defy all laws of physics and logic. Definitely one of those games where players can easily deflect flaws by claiming realism for one thing and it's just a game for another, but is it just a game you'll enjoy playing? Well, see what we have to say and you can decide. As pointed out in our side quest, the game looks fantastic with a lot of detail and work put into making sure the game is as immersive as possible. We'll have to give Ubisoft credit here, as while it's nowhere near the quality of their E3 presentation, but that's hardly new for Ubisoft's iconic marketing, it still looks good even on the lowest settings. The game particularly comes into its own when the fog kicks in and heavy snowfall comes from the sky, making the game feel far more like Silent Hill muscling in on New York's turf. The detail even extends to the game's animations, which have a lot of small but welcome touches. For example, when not in direct combat or facing a threat, your character will keep their finger outside of the trigger guard, essentially keeping good trigger discipline at all times. I know, big deal, right? But it does help show that someone on the team wanted to put that extra level of attention, and we can't find any animations that stand out as being flat out wrong for the weapon you're using. There is one small little hiccup with this, in that exploring your base of operations, your character cannot have weapons drawn, but will still pretend to hold the grip and trigger guard when interacting with lootable items. It's clearly a nitpick, but it is somewhat amusing. What isn't a nitpick are the usual iconic Ubisoft levels of bugs that this game is completely infested with. Some animations can cause Stretch Armstrong syndrome, others will cause enemies to push through the walls. Hell, some of the enemies will even spawn inside of walls, or open doors that end up leading to brick walls and they'll just phase through like Kitty Pryde. While I've only had a few bugs, my co-writer Dresker is living under the bugpocalypse, and has sent me entire Imager pages filled with shots of bugs and problems with the game. It would get downright comical. He's fallen through the maps more times than he can count, and even did it once while we were in a dungeon, which was all caught live on stream. His combat skills regularly fail to trigger, and he's had enough graphical glitches to make a montage. Problems do exist in the game, but the degree on which he'll have them will vary. The music is pretty nice, and there are decent tracks and even a couple standouts, but it's one of those soundtracks that works better outside of the game, because honestly you probably won't hear that much of it. Dynamic tracks that play during combat are all drowned out by the combat itself, and when just running around the city gathering collectibles, the music choice gets very muted and atmospheric. While this is a fantastic choice for making you feel the loneliness and desperation of a city gone mad, for an MMO with lots of grinding and exploring, you just tend to feel the tedium build a bit faster, especially if you're trying to showcase the game for others. When playing the game on stream and being outside of this game's, for lack of a more fitting term, dungeons, I've resorted to just playing music through iTunes. The sound design itself is one of the higher watermarks of the game. Weapons fire, grenades, fire effects, shooting through glass, even the popping of tires sounds really nice and can lend a bit more tension to the game's combat. They don't get things 100% accurate, as many gun nuts might tell you, but Ubisoft is one of the few companies that actually make silencers sound like they would in real life. Well, for most weapons, pistols and sniper rifles will still do that Hollywood silencer effect. In general, though, we can give Ubisoft some serious credit for their work in sound design. Where we lose some points is in the quality of the voice cast, though. Nothing here is outright terrible, but there is a lot of mediocre. There's a lot of takes that seem like their first line read, and oftentimes the writing just doesn't come across very good. It may very well be that the quality of writing is what makes the dialogue feel far more stilted, but the cast doesn't seem to put that much effort into their roles half the time, and each character is written as very one-dimensional. JDF soldiers use the same few lines when spotting you or engaging enemies, and they seem really confused about just what you're fighting at any given time. "Watch out, cleaners!" they'll scream as you exchange fire with rioters. "Rikers incoming!" they'll yell to an empty battlefield as you finish off the last few cleaners for a mission. Factions will talk about how the JTF is sending people after their leader, after you've already killed them days ago. This is also a game where maturity spells more than just the chat room yelling out the words fuck and shit unprompted, so parents mindful of that might want to take notice. I clearly don't give a shit because it lets me take off my internal swear filter for this video, but like the game, I'm not going to try to overuse harsh language. There will be far more observations made about the writing when we get to gameplay and focus on the story, but to cap things off, the voice work just kind of sits in a middle ground. Starting out, you'll be given a cutscene, which is a brief preview of the situation, including spoiling the fact that this was not a natural disaster of any sort, but a man-made bioweapon. Now granted, this is meta-knowledge that only you, the player, has, and you'll find that many of the early missions will have you trying to figure out what happened, with all the shocking revelations being things that you already know. This leads into the description of what the Division is, as well as its role in the story, and it can get rather pretentious about the whole affair, but if judging by the rest of the game, the Division seems more like a bunch of hypocrites that act above the law and don't come across as very bright. The character creator is introduced to you in an amusing manner, where you'll spot your Division agent walking down the street to check in on a downed JTF officer, before the camera pans to show your reflection in the window of a police car and opens up the customization options. I certainly can't think of many examples where the character creator flowed seamlessly from an in-game cutscene like this, but sadly that unique opening leads to an incredibly limited system, granting you a scant few basic faces and hairstyles. During the beta, it was understandable they only allowed you to hit random and go, but now that we're in the full game, this character creator is so minute that we wonder why it's here in the first place, when your choice in gear and clothing will make so much more of a difference to your appearance. From here, you'll be introduced to the game proper, and immediately we need to get something out of the way. While this game was always marketed as an MMO, the game does have the Tom Clancy brand on it. But this is no tactical shooter, and it comes across more like Borderlands Escape from New York than anything from the Tom Clancy series. Honestly, it'll help your enjoyment immensely if you completely forget about the Clancy brand altogether, and just simply focus on this being a new IP called The Division. Going back on that modern sci-fi shtick, it all tends to fall in The Division themselves. Ignoring how Ubisoft completely cockslaps the word iconic, it ties mostly to The Division as a unit and their most iconic feature. No, not that bland-ass brown jacket, the glowing ring on the watch and backpack. Why the fuck would anyone ever think about that jacket? This glowing watch is the connection point for your guiding AI known as Isaac, a Deus Ex Machina guffin, used to hand-wave away several odd points about this game, like why the Division showed up in the first place, how you can see health bars above known enemy combatants, or how you can tell where items are located for the taking. The watch has more logically sound real features like keeping track of your heart rate and vitals, but then it'll go as far as sending out light pulses that can make enemies take more damage, and it takes a lot of the things in the game out of the realm of believability. Oh, I'm sorry, I was just replying to a text. Okay, yeah, these things have come a long way, but the minute that Microsoft and Fitbit team up with Google to make a smartwatch that uses cell phone and security camera data to create a holographic representation of past events that gets beamed directly into my contact lenses, get back to me. Controls are simple enough to grasp. It's basically a third-person shooter with FPS control. Aim with the mouse, WASD to move, Q and E end up being skill slots, with a skill later granted to the T key, which will act as your ultimate. R reloads, shift sprints. The odd choices will include control for context-sensitive climbing interactions, and space to lock yourself into cover. You might find that both commands tend to be annoyingly sensitive and fickle at times. F acts as your interact key, and as most PC games do, you can remap any of these keys if anything feels too out of place. Not sure why people always need to point that shit out when I remark about odd default control schemes like I didn't fucking know. Now, I had no real idea where to put this, and it's not really important to the game or anything, but I thought it was a neat feature nonetheless. If you happen to own a Logitech Orion Spark keyboard, one of those backlit keyboards with colored programmable keys, the game automatically has a profile that will work directly with that keyboard. Here, let me show you. When you start the game, you'll notice that the keyboard goes completely blank. I was afraid that something was wrong until I actually loaded up my character and saw it light up like this. Red keys will usually denote combat, orange keys are social or menu interactions, green keys like WASD, Shift, Control, and Sprint will denote your movement, and purple denotes interactions. A more interesting feature is that the keys will react actively to the game as you're playing, so if you're low on ammo, the R key for reload will start flashing. If you're low on health, the V key for your health packs will flash. If you have party members, the F keys will represent them, and if one of them is in trouble, that key will flash red instead of solid green. Hell, if you have a Logitech G600 as well, that mouse will flash red when you're in combat. It's a neat touch that I didn't notice right away, and while I don't feel it's remotely needed, and maybe having the keys for your skill change color when you're on cooldown would have been nice to see as well, it is a fun feature if you happen to have that keyboard or mouse. Not sure if it works on others like the Razer Chroma series, though. Feel free to tell me. Alright, back to things that actually matter. A sad truth is that combat can feel incredibly tedious here, and this is due to the RPG nature of the game. Your weapons and gear are level-based, so just like any MMO, your starting weapons will be clearly outmatched by weapons just a few levels later as enemies gain more health and even more armor. These increases are not communicated visually, just from the enemy health bar that shows their level and if they're an elite or boss character that'll get additional bonuses and abilities. This leads to the feeling that many enemies are simply just bullet sponges, and combat does often devolve into a tedious exercise of unloading a full magazine in someone's head, ducking down to reload, and repeating the drill several times over. Ballistic hoodies is a fairly common joke among this game's players. This only gets worse and worse as you reach higher levels, with hard mode play turning even the simplest enemy into tanky bullet sponges, and minor street encounters into wars of attrition. The Division does break from some traditional RPG norms with its combat and level system, since your levels really only dictate what level of gear that you're restricted to using, and not what abilities, talents, or perks you can use. To unlock those, you'd need to upgrade your forward base of operation that's set up inside the US Post Office. This is a rather interesting system, and a unique take on the idea of progression within an RPG, but that doesn't necessarily make it a good one. Oftentimes myself and Dresker would upgrade our operation based more on what we felt would be necessary for survival in an apocalyptic scenario, but this can often be in direct conflict to giving yourself useful upgrades for your skills. Beyond your base level and gear, your character's progress just depends heavily on how much you've cleaned up the post office. To this end, you'll have several support characters to assist you in operating your base, but you may find them all incredibly forgettable. The game seems to go out of its way to ensure that everyone has a single character trait that defines them. The first mission contact is a middle-aged woman who drones on in a motherly tone and laments her rocky marriage, and that's it. Another contact is an actor that constantly has to remind you how much your current situation is like a TV show episode that he was on, and that's it. This extends to notable enemy characters as well, which can really undercut their menace and believability. Most of the story and motivations of the enemies within this game are found through various audio logs, be they files found on a PC, discarded cell phone messages littered throughout the city, or most oddly, the echoes, holographic recreations of past events that you can interact with and see what happened in certain areas. They'll turn your entire screen blue and toss up orange-spotted holograms that contain information gathered from cell phones and security cameras to create a moment frozen in time. What, you thought I made that shit up earlier? Some of the game's most grimdark scenarios occur in these echoes, and paints the enemy factions in a painfully one-dimensional, almost comedically over-the-top light. We actually were thinking up and had more hopes for some more interesting scenarios for the various enemy factions in the game, but those never came to fruition, and it didn't really help the droning routine of facing them in combat. The enemies are known by 4 major factions. The Rioters being gang members and street toughs who've banded together to take control of territories, and act more like a band of roving scavengers than actual survivors. They're your most basic enemy in the game, and the only faction in the game without a leader, so they never really have a story reason to disband, and they're organized by their disorganization. They're also the biggest point of hypocrisy in the game, as they consist of looters who have taken advantage of the chaos to get revenge on the law. Then we seem to be fighting the Rioters for having the audacity to survive in this wasteland by destroying property, looting abandoned stores, and taking supplies from their victims, while we, as the Noble Division agents, destroy property, loot abandoned stores, and take supplies from our victims. I'm not the first person to point this out, and I will not be the last. The Cleaners are former members of the New York Sanitations Department, who are led by a vengeful reactionary and have decided that the only way to get rid of the dollar flu is to literally burn out the infection, which leads them to slaughtering innocents in the most horrifying and flammable ways possible. Sadly, the cleaners have an effective strategy, making their ideas somewhat reasonable, but their brutal, unforgiving actions and their with us or against us attitude will have them setting fire to the first person they see with a case of the sniffles. They make one hell of a lovely fireworks show, though. The Rikers are inmates who escaped from Rikers Prison and act as the most blatantly fear-mongered representation of a prisoner that one could imagine, including lack of intelligence, an overwhelming brutality, and a complete loathing of any authority figure to a fault. It's like Ubisoft gathered together a group of skittish suburbanites whose knowledge of crime in the prison system came entirely from binge-watching Oz and The Purge.
I just voted to make crime legal. It's purge time, baby!
They're extremist psychopaths led by an even larger extremist psychopath, but it's hard to see them as little more than rioters with masks in this game. The Last Man Battalion are a group of defected soldiers. What could have easily been the most interesting faction in the game, the Last Man Battalion and its leader were set up initially as a counterpoint to the incompetence of the JTF, and they were actually getting things done. The sad truth is that there's no moral ambiguity here, and the LMB are outright evil and must be stopped, which makes the fact that Ubisoft went for the "some of the first wave went rogue" cliché all the more frustrating. Dresker called that one hard, even during the beta. What makes things so odd about all these factions is the weird way that Ubisoft often tries to humanize them through collectible audio logs. You'll hear rioters lament the choices that they had to make to survive, as cleaners will regret the actions that they're taking and convince themselves that it's still for the greater good. Rikers will question the motives of their leader in complete fear of her, while LMB soldiers try to defect after being forced to fire on civilians, and rogue agents will lament how the JTF left them to die in dangerous areas. Then, you see another cutscene of Rikers executing a JTF officer who's begging for their life, or forcing a captured agent to drink bleach, or you watch the cleaners set fire to an asthma sufferer, and immediately remember that Ubisoft wrote these people like comic book supervillains, and you don't even feel remotely bad about fucking their shit up. To this end, you end up taking on two very distinct types of quests to take them out, which fit within the typical MMO quest and side quest mentality. The first are known as missions and are designated by light blue pentagons on the map and require you to talk to a JTF operator within the safe house to begin. These follow a very standard set of guidelines, with bounties seeing you gun down named offenders and their lieutenants, search and rescue where you'll find a particular person, preferably still among the living, supply drop, which acts as a more involved supply defense mission compared to their shorter side quest counterpart, and much later in the game, emergency supplies where you'll have to hunt down key materials that the local JTF need in the area. Thankfully, when you complete most of these missions, you don't need to head back to base or talk to anyone, and the mission is immediately turned in the moment it completes and you get your rewards. This does make us wonder exactly when we took those critical supplies back to base, but at least it saves time for the player. The second type of quest will follow your typical side quest mentality and can easily be stumbled into while roaming around the game's world. You can choose to interact with maps set up in each area's safe house and be giving the exact details on location type and which wing it'll benefit, but you don't have to. The game calls these side activities encounters, and they have bits of variety to them, as well as defending various assets in the field, rescuing hostages, securing lost supplies, performing virus research, and maintaining the city's water system, or even assaulting an enemy fortified position. The sad truth is that you'll find out very quickly that all these activities are simply copy-pasted and thrown together. Sure, the locations and very minor details will change, but they all follow incredibly formulaic patterns and can be easily autopiloted through without much effort. Fortunately, like the vast majority of MMOs out there are dungeons that involve more complicated missions, interesting locations, and loot opportunities. Now sure, the game won't call them dungeons, but it's pretty much what they are, and they're essential to fully fleshing out your base to completion and for the game's story. These dungeons are also color coordinated to tell you exactly what wing of the base will benefit from completion, and what sort of rewards you can expect to receive. These are repeatable as well, and even can have their difficulty adjusted, with some allowing for the challenge mode difficulty, which will require a very well-geared team of level 30 agents to complete, as the game removes all limits, sets enemies to level 32, and gives all of them gold status. Yes, even the standard mooks. Most of these dungeons have you progressing through set waves of enemies until you reach a boss encounter, which is just usually a bullet sponge guy you need to kill to drop a bunch of loot. This doesn't actually change formula until the very end of the game with a slightly different boss fight, but by then it starts to feel a little bit too little too late. With an incredibly recent patch, the developers added even higher tier dungeons that'll only unlock once you hit level 30, and have enough high-end items to get your gear score up to an appropriate minimum to even attempt it. These are to continue the game's story and to allow for even better rewards with tougher dungeons and harder encounters than seen before. The dungeons are still where the largest bulks of the story will be presented and told to the player, though. What really tends to get on Dresker's nerves is that the storyline is your usual generic modern crisis tale, and he was even able to call most of the story beats well in advance. Not helping the matter is the rather odd tone in which lines can be delivered when something is considered shocking by your NPC support staff, only to watch a video where a rogue agent describes what it was like to be abandoned by his own organization, and decided he had to look out for himself now, noting that the LMB were actually accomplishing something in the fiasco of bad decisions that was the post-Dollar Flu Manhattan. This is undermined by having an actual shocking scene play out just before this exchange, where said rogue was executing other agents who wouldn't turn to his side, but that barely gets a fifth as much of alarm when found out. Perhaps Ubisoft just doesn't know what most of these words mean in English. I mean, the legendary abuse of the word iconic is well known at this point, but it seems like we can add shocking, disturbing, and unbelievable to that list as well. Outside of all of that is the usual sandbox game collectibles that'll help flesh out the world and give you something to try to get 100% completion in. Dresker was just crazy enough to do this, and all activities and dungeons throughout the map. We also note that gameplay and story segregation are a real problem within the game. The support staff aren't much better, as the amusing Honest Trailers video points out about this game as well, as all of them are 100% forgettable. As a warning for completionists, we do want to address that there's an echo in the Chelsea area that can frustrate people for hours trying to figure out how to get the map completion for that area. The short answer being, don't bother wasting your time, as you cannot physically retrieve that echo until the very end of the campaign. What ends up happening is that we'd spend so much of our time out in the world just calling out phone when they would show up, as we'd rather want to go and collect that and ignore the gameplay entirely before proceeding. Or we'd become far more excited about the possibility of looting clothing from abandoned apartments or tossing a water bottle at a random citizen that our watch declared is in need. It's odd because the clothing options are incredibly basic and end up looking so similar to each other it's practically pointless. Hitting the level cap only gives you these bonus content areas and doesn't really unlock any kind of gameplay that you haven't already encountered, with the minor exception of gaining Phoenix credits to unlock high-end gear. So endgame is once again just a case of all the things that you've done before and just more of it. All in all, it's a bit of a mixed bag, but there is a lot of things to do, even if the quality might not be all that impressive in the long run. Community section is going to be rather brief, as there honestly isn't much to talk about here. While this game is more or less an MMO, it's one of the tamest versions of one, acting more as a single-player campaign with the ability to bring friends along for the story, while having a literal wall separating you from the PvP and major focus of the game. Playing the game normally can feel like playing an incredibly tedious Borderlands clone set in the modern day with copy-pasted quests and encounters in the same tedious combat. You can run into other players in the various safe houses to group up if you so choose, but you won't see any other players running around the world on their own, which is a mixed blessing, as it ensures you don't have to worry about quests being taken over by other players, but also makes the game feel less connected and the community more like a vestigial limb. This all changes when you enter the walls of the Dark Zone and are thrown into the game's PvPvE, and are expected to stand on your own 2 feet in a hostile environment, where literally anyone outside of your party could decide to kill you for any reason. While it's interesting in practice, the majority of the player base would rather work together and oftentimes actively go out of their way to humiliate those that end up going rogue, which does add more risk to the possible rewards of killing other players for loot. Players won't be the only risk within the Dark Zone, however, as there are several high-level NPCs that will roam about the area or have themselves set up in special locations. These NPCs act as mini dungeons or encounters, and often drop loot when they're defeated that must be exfiltrated from the Dark Zone by calling in an extraction helicopter to take the loot to decontamination. This is where the most tension can be found, as calling in for a chopper will alert everyone within the Dark Zone that it's on its way, and you can only call in a chopper if you have loot, essentially painting a target on your back while you're waiting for the chopper to arrive. This is also where you're most likely to run into other players, as the game does have a voice-over IP function that you can easily communicate with each other, mostly just state your intentions or just risk being shot. With that said, we need to give a warning. This voice system will actually broadcast your IP address whenever you speak, meaning anyone can check the packets that they've received and find said IP address. It wouldn't be a Ubisoft title without hilarious oversight, and that's a pretty egregious example, though it's a much nicer snafu compared to the easy hacking that they allowed during the beta due to sheer laziness. For those that didn't know, the game used to trust that a small file on your computer would keep track of your position, ammo, and health, making The Division one of the single easiest games to cheat in to date. The Dark Zone is really where the meat of the community lies, and the Wild West atmosphere, with rogue players looking for loot or trolling opportunities that can be hunted down by de facto packs of bounty hunters, does offer up a whole new level of tension that might be worth the price of admission alone. The cash shop's another section that we won't be spending much time on, but thankfully for good reason. See, The Division is not a free-to-play game. We'll give you a moment to pretend to be surprised, but fortunately Ubisoft didn't double dip in this regard, and they ensured there's really no microtransactions to speak of. But there are a couple things you could choose to spend your money on. Like, there's a couple different cosmetic packs consisting of outfits that you cannot obtain in the game otherwise, and a limited season pass which will come with a confirmed total of 3 expansion packs when they're launched, while giving a few other bonuses to start off your adventures in Manhattan. This does lead to a feeling that what we've paid for isn't the complete experience. The game itself ends on a terrible cliffhanger, and all the expansions were announced before the game was even launched. Cynically, we'd say that's Ubisoft chopping off the content and locking the actual ending behind a paywall to wring more money out of the player base. Whether this is true or not will remain to be seen. I was fairly excited to start work on this, and I think a lot of us in Grindstone were initially. A few of them even opted to drop out of Black Desert and focus on this game when it launched. Hell, I almost wanted to join them, looking greatly forward to upgrading the main base and finding more of the missions. Though I was a bit surprised in how easy it was to burn through those main missions and instances, while the rest of our group just burned out pretty hard. I find the story intriguing, if rather overblown and exaggerated, but I don't really feel the need to hop into the game repeatedly until I see what else comes of the story in the next updates. We'll see how it goes. Here's my final rating. If you're looking for a simple shooter featuring RPG elements, this might have a lot in store for you. Loot hounds especially might enjoy constantly finding and upgrading new weapons, and there's plenty of moments to have them saying, "Aw dude, 4 strength, 4 stam leather belt?" It's hard to say this game is an MMO in a traditional sense. So much of the gameplay has multiplayer that's purely opt-in. You can play through the entire campaign without ever running into another person unless you invite them, and that's something a lot of people who prefer to play solo could appreciate. If you want to bring friends without having to concern yourself with strangers, it's pretty simple. Those who do want a more open-world traditional environment of potential friends and enemies can enter the Dark Zone, and partake in some interesting open PvP, where anyone can be an ally or an enemy at any given tense moment. You have to buy this game if you want to play it. And yeah, I don't know where I get off calling this show the free-to-play MMO review show anymore either. The Division retails for $60, but if Ubisoft is any indication, you won't have to wait all that long for a price drop, or an inevitable special edition that's sold with every DLC pack included for a fraction of the price of the original game. If you got the patience or you can find it at a lower price, you may just want to hold off on this game if something about it bugs you. Adding simple cosmetic microtransactions can be annoying, but some of the packs are nice, and what was I going to do, not buy the Marine Corps pack? If you love playing games that promise to finish themselves later, you might want to opt in for that season pass. No word on how much that'll save you as opposed to paying for them individually, but, you know, it's there, and most people have already made their opinions on the practice very clear. Oh yeah, is this ever a Ubisoft game? Not only is it another Ubisoft the Game entry, featuring the open world with similar missions and collectible lore snippets, but almost every single one of their infamous bugs makes an appearance, from ethereal floors to the faceless face. If your stance on Ubisoft is firm in the ground, this game will not loosen up a damn thing, and you're only here to see how much was screwed up by them this time. While I personally have no history or care enough about their track record, they still have a track record and this game holds it to the status quo. I think what makes most people so against this game, well, beyond who produced it, is that many people went in expecting something that this was not. It doesn't help that the Tom Clancy name was tacked on here, giving people images of Ghost Recon and Rainbow Six, when this game is more in common with Destiny. It's very much an RPG shooter with MMO elements, and that surprise may bore or annoy people who don't enjoy that kind of gameplay. Of course, if tacking Tom Clancy onto the Division had you coming in expecting tactical realism at all, like the vast majority of Tom Clancy titles, you will be sorely disappointed. This is a textbook example of in-name only, and having this branding is likely what made the game so polarizing. The Division shares far more in common with Borderlands than any other Tom Clancy game, and it's easy to think cynically that Ubisoft just used Tom Clancy for brand name recognition instead of letting the IP stand on its own. If your mind drifts to and firmly cements within Splinter Cell, Rainbow Six, or Ghost Recon when you hear that name, you probably won't want to go diving into this title. Next time, my attention will get divided between two vastly different titles looking to launch around the exact same time. At least the one I'm most likely to look at is going to be free. Hey, once again, thanks for sticking around and checking out this video on a thing that almost everyone else has already talked about. If you want to check out what I looked at last month, as I thought would be a lot more popular, you can take a look at the last full MMO Grinder episode on Black Desert. And if you're interested in my side content, I've got a video on the game Brawlhalla, which I'm seeing making the rounds around Facebook ads lately. It's a Smash clone, I like it enough, it's fun, we're probably going to keep doing something with it. To find out what we really thought about this game, and trust us, opinions get divided, I'm not the only person writing this script, you know. We have the Tribunal section on our website at mmogrinder.net, so feel free to take a look and get pissed off at what everyone had to say about this game. Once again, Slipstream's still paying his due, so I get to plug his show, which seems to be on hiatus for the rest of this month, but if you want to check out past episodes, you can head to twitch.tv/slipstreamx14, or to his website for his podcast directly at notokensrequired.com. I feel like I could use this to plug more stuff, I just don't feel like it. I mean, y'all know how this works. Subscribe, Twitter, whatever, you can press buttons. You ain't 5.